beginning with a talk by Dr. Nayeri. Over the last couple of days, we've heard people from different disciplines address the issue of yesterday, today, and tomorrow in relation to Iran. We've had, let's say, an economist, Dr. Alireza Akbari. We've had somebody from the field of medicine, Orkide Behruzan, one from medical anthropology, Pardis Mahdavi, and an anthropologist, cultural studies specialist with a foot in biomedicine. That's actually Pardis's teacher at MIT, Michael Fisher. Last night, I wasn't able to participate, but I heard that there was a wonderful session led by a person who's in social work, a social worker, if you will, Dariush Fakheri, who's the editor of Cheshmandaz, the magazine, and conducts sessions with young people to discuss issues that young people have, young Iranians, and the ways that they try to deal with the different cultural norms and practices between themselves here in America and their parents who are from Iran. And I heard it was a very successful and productive session, and hopefully may continue. Today, we have two speakers who are in the field of physics, theoretical and applied, Dr. Ali Nayeri and Mohammad Hafizi. We have one political scientist, Abbas Milani, and one speaker in the field of literature, Ahmad Karimi Hakkak. So this is a very special, I would say, kind of perspective, different perspectives brought on the issue. I hope you're enjoying it. And we love how you participate. The questions are just really marvelous. Everybody appreciates the fact that people are keeping their questions short and to the point. So the only reminder I'd like to make is to please turn off your cell phones. And if you enter and exit this room, to please make sure to shut the door behind you so that the noise doesn't penetrate outside of here. And if you cross the room, to please duck before the camera so you don't get in the shot. Now I'm going to ask Bahar Davari to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Good morning. It is my pleasure to introduce the first speaker for today, Dr. Ali Nayeri, who has received his PhD in theoretical physics from IUCAA in 1999. He was then appointed as a postdoctoral associate at the Department of Physics at MIT for 2 years, and as postdoctoral fellow at MIT Center for Theoretical Physics for an additional year. Since then, he has been a research affiliate at MIT. He was also a research scientist and visiting professor at the Institute for Fundamental Theory at University of Florida. He is currently with the Harvard Physics Department in Cambridge. His fields of research include early universe and inflation, brain and string cosmology, semi-classical theory of gravity, and alternative cosmologies. Dr. Nayeri has published numerous papers in various scientific journals in US, UK, Netherlands, and Russia. He's co-founder and current member of the board of directors of the Iranian Studies at MIT, co-founder of Iranian Research Group at University of Florida, and the principal investigator for Physics of Chaos and Society project. He, along with Abbas Milani, has chaired the Iran Future Prospects at Stanford since October 2004. He is also among the top 100 Iranian American scientists. Dr. Nayeri has been working on application of physics on social sciences and sociology, and has given numerous talks on popularizing science and on sociology and physics. He has appeared on a number of TV and radio programs, including KRSI, Voice of America, BBC, World Service, and numerous others. The title of his talk today will be, Where Are We Going? Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nayeri.
Ladies and gentlemen, Thanks for coming to this very early morning session. It was hard for me. I'm sure it was even harder for you to join me here. And I'm not an early morning person, so I had a hard time to come here on time. But fortunately, there was a 10 to 15 minutes delay. Well, after my Persian talk the day before yesterday, I decided to change, not entirely, or maybe entirely, my Persian talk. So today, in fact, mostly I will focus on Iran's nuclear issue instead. And please keep it secret. Don't tell Mr. Firouzi about that. And this would be among us. Next page, please. Okay. In fact, this is from my last year's talk about the evolution and the higher education centers in Iran from the ancient time to the time of Pahlavi dynasty. But what for the moment I would like you to focus is these two institutes, namely Dar al-Funun, which was established during the time of Nasruddin Shah Qajar, and University of Tehran under the reign of Reza Shah. These two institutes were supposed to play extremely important roles in the future of, let's say, scientific and technological programs of Iran, but unfortunately, that never happened. Well, I don't have time here to talk about that particular case. I hope you remember what I said in Persian the day before yesterday. So let's skip this and go to the next page. And again, hit the enter, please. Okay, so let's quickly recap about our history here. Let's say history of science and technology in Iran. So it started with Dar al-Funun, as I mentioned to you. The initial goal was to import modern science and technology to Iran. So Dar al-Funun, or also it was known as the Polytechnic of Tehran, was established in 1851. And the first modern textbook in physics was published, as you can see, just 5 years later by an Austerian teacher who was a lousy teacher, if you wish, in 1856. Lots of problems in that book, even when you compare the book with the contemporary books in the Europe. I'm not comparing that book with the present books in physics, but with the books that were publishing in Europe around this time. Next. Of course, then we had Dar al-Mu'allamin, which was kind of seeds for University of Tehran, and that was for the first time that physics was taught at the university level. And the first students graduated in 1932. This shows you the delay of entering or importing the modern physics in Iran. Remember, 1932 was well after, let's say, invention of special relativity or general relativity or quantum physics or quantum mechanics, and these are the subjects, for instance, you need to have a nuclear technology. Okay, next one. So of course, then, as I mentioned to you, we had Tehran University. The physics group was established in 1934, 2 years after the first graduation of Dar al-Mu'allamin. The big difference between Tehran University and Dar al-Funun, as I mentioned many times, was that the university professors here were among the sharpest university teachers in Iran, because they were picked from the sharpest students. They went abroad as scholars, and they came back and they taught in Tehran University. So that was a big difference compared, for instance, to Namsavi, who in fact was not a physics major scholar. So here you can see the first international paper from Iran published in 1965. Please remember these dates, because it's important. It shows the lag that we were lagging behind completely compared to India, for instance, compared to rest of the Europe, and of course the United States. This is 1965. The other technical university we had was Amir Kabir University in 1958. And the reason I'm just picking up this university, because now by the Western media, this is one of the universities that's blamed to conduct nuclear research. And of course, this is my favorite one, and perhaps others as well, the Sharif or Aryameh University of Technology, or as we call it, MIT of Iran. It was established in 1966, and soon after, the brilliant students graduated from this university, and most of them went to the United States. Another center which we have to consider, particularly from perspective of the nuclear issues, is the Isfahan Nuclear Technology Center, which was established in 1971. And then I will tell you why Shah prompted to establish this Nuclear Technology Center. Next one. And of course, as you can see, 4 years later, Iran Atomic Organization was founded. And I'm going to talk in more details about the Iran Atomic Organization. Another university that is now said by the Western media that is conducting nuclear research is Islamic Azad University in Karaj. They have a tokamak, which basically you can do nuclear research, because the tokamak they have is really a small scale to conduct any industrial activity for the nuclear purposes. And for the theoretical side, and perhaps if you talk to the most of the Western physicists, American physicists in particular, the only place they know in Iran, which is very active in theoretical physics, is the Institute for Theoretical Physics and Mathematics, this is wrong, sorry, it's IPM. So most of the physicists in the US are familiar with the name of IPM. This is the best center so far we have, in particularly in high energy physics. It was established in 1990. The head of this institute is no one but Dr. Javad Larijani. His brother, Ali Larijani, is the negotiator now. He's the kind of representative of Iran. I have met this guy. He's definitely smart. He got his PhD in mathematics from Berkeley University. And believe it or not, Javad Larijani was the person who brought internet to Iran. And this institute was the first place in Iran which had internet connection and email. So IPM introduced Iran and Iranians to the World Wide Web and internet. There is another center of excellence in Iran, which is recognized by TUWAS, which is Third World Academy of Science, and it's called a Center of Excellence in Physics in Iran, and it is only for graduate studies, no undergraduate studies. And it's founded in 1992. Okay, so just a quick recap about physics in Iran. There are totally 80 physics departments in Iran currently, out of which 65 of them belong to the state universities, and the others are supposedly private universities. Total number of physics students are about 17,000, and about 60,000 are holding BS, 80-50 MS, and 250 PhD students we have there. There were about 4,100 physics students in 1978, so you can see the growth from 1978. And this is, the data I have is rather old, this is 2004. So first MS student admitted in 1956, while the PhD program officially started after the visit by the late physics Nobel laureate a Pakistani physicist, Muhammad Abdus Salam, in 1988. In fact, I was a freshman student when he was visiting Iran. There are about now 700 faculty members nationwide compared to 230 in 1978. So now you can see why I said that there was a kind of exponential growth in the scientific papers and publications of Iranians. So before revolution, this BR stands for before revolution. So before revolution, there was no real graduate school whatsoever, except this one, which was kind of, even the buildings look like Harvard University. But unfortunately, this never materialized. The name of the university was the Reza Shah the Great University, and it was meant to be only for graduate students in the Caspian seashores, in fact. It's a beautiful place. Now it's called Danishgah Babul Sar. Okay, in undergraduate level, in Iran now they are teaching solid-state physics, atomic physics, and nuclear physics. In graduate level, theoretical condensed matter physics, theoretical high-energy physics, and cosmology, nuclear physics, laser, and nonlinear optics. And we are extremely lagging behind in experimental physics in most of the fields. But they are doing better and better each year, in fact. Again, I picked these courses because it is important, as I mentioned to you, to have a nuclear program besides, its technical issues. From the point of view of the theoretical issues, you need to know, for instance, quantum mechanics, which was, invented by many physicists in Germany and Netherlands in 1925. So remember, quantum mechanics was founded in 1925. But the first course on quantum mechanics taught in Iran in 1964. The first course on nuclear physics was just taught a year later after this, in 1965. First course on special relativity, which is again a very important ingredient for nuclear technology, was taught in 1972. General relativity, which is not related to do anything in particular with nuclear issues, taught for the first time after the revolution in 1981. And Einstein formulated general relativity in 1916. Again, see the lag here. The Physical Society of Iran was established in 1934, and it had a kind of bumpy road towards what it is now. So if you are interested later on, I can talk more about this, but let's skip this slide for the moment. Okay, so I'm going to start some kind of movies that they show the last part and they have a flashback. So I'm going to do this. So I'm going to start from what we know now, and then I'll give you the history. This was very important for the history of Iran, not scientifically and technologically, but also politically. Iran's program and efforts for building sophisticated facilities at Natanz and several other cities, which eventually enriched uranium, was revealed by the then president of Iran, Mohammad Khatami, on February 9, 2003. Remember, I'm saying this was officially revealed because there was some revelations by opposition groups like Mujahideen Khalq. But Iranians admitted officially that Iran's nuclear issue, the facilities by Mohammad Khatami on February 9, 2003. So Khatami announced the existence of Natanz, and I will show you a picture of the satellite picture of Natanz and other facilities on Iran's television. And in fact, honestly, he invited the International Atomic Energy Agency, or since for brevity, I call it IAEA, to visit Iran nuclear facilities. So the head of the IAEA, President Mohammad al-Baradei, accompanied by a team of experts and inspectors, to visit Iran in late February 2003. So since then, in fact, IAEA experts and inspectors have been visiting Iran nuclear facilities. At least those were, revealed by Iranian government. So on September 12, 2003, the IAEA gave Iran, and that was the first ultimatum by the IAEA, to reveal all the details of the nuclear facilities. And the deadline for that time was October 31st, 2003. So when you see that there is a deadline for Iran by the end of August, you shouldn't be surprised. There have been so many deadlines so far for this matter. And Iranians are great, because all of us are great for delaying things. So, and I will go through this in more details again. Okay, so what happens was that after the first visit by the IAEA inspectors and specialists, particularly the Natanz facilities and few other locations, those were kind of surprised, the United States and the European Union, Russia and Japan as well. So that was, remember, the time I mentioned was during the Clinton administration. So there is a similarities between Clinton and Bush administration in this regard. There is no, the nuclear policy of the United States regarding Iran, it's almost the same as Clinton administration so far. So as most of you know, the Bush administration argues that the primary purposes of Iran's nuclear program was for weapon purposes. It was not for the peaceful purposes. And finally, so the EU was the main negotiator with Iran. So it was kind of a broker between Iran and the rest of the world. Particularly because of now Dr. Akbari can talk more about these things, but because of lots of investments by the European unions, particularly by French and German in the oil fields of Iran, particularly Azadigan oil field. So they always was kind of, their approach was more constructive than the US approach because, they had lots of investment in Iran. Next page. Okay, so this is again the important question. By the way, can you go to the previous page? So remember, I have 3 G's. This was the first G, the great surprise. And have you noticed that 3 G's look like 3 6s? And so here you go. So this is the second G. The great question is, according to the original IAEA agreement, the safeguard agreements, believe it or not, or would you like to be, take it or not, Iran did not have to declare the start of the construction of Natanz facilities. That was according to the NPT agreement. So if there is any problem, there could be a declaration just 180 days before introducing any nuclear material. So the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, allows Iran, and that's very important, that's the problem in NPT, in fact, allows Iran to legally build any nuclear facility, including one for uranium enrichment, so long as it is intended for peaceful purposes, as you know. Moreover, the NPT, and this is again important, allows the member states to withdraw from the agreement, and that's the reason that so far Iranians have threatened the rest of the world that they will pull off from the NPT treaty. So the question is, does Iran need nuclear energy, assuming there is no intention for building nuclear weapon, and is occurring in its national interest? So it is in the national interest of Iran to have nuclear power plants, let alone the nuclear weapons? This is the big question, or as I call it, the great question. The next G, maybe that was the third G, I forgot. Anyways, that's not important. So let me just okay, so I want to give you an extremely short introduction to nuclear physics, and that's the reason I call it 000 course in nuclear physics. Of course, this is not a real picture, and I don't want anyone to see the real one. Hopefully, never. But so, as you know, the smallest part of a matter is atom, and any atom consists of nucleons and electrons. Inside the nucleons are protons with positive charge. Protons have positive charges, and neutrons are neutral. Next page. So this is, we call it a nuclear fission, and that is how most of the power plants are working. So this is a nucleus of an atom, most probably a uranium. So you can split the nucleus of an atom into smaller parts, smaller fragments, by just shooting another neutron, which is very heavy particle, to this nucleus of an atom, which is usually a uranium-235 or uranium-233 or even plutonium-239. These numbers shows how many, in fact, protons are inside those atoms. Next page, please. So now, perhaps you have heard about light water reactors and heavy water reactors. So this is this slide at least shows briefly what we mean by heavy and light in physics. So basically, here you can have if you bring two smaller fragments of atoms, like hydrogen or hydrogen isotopes. By isotope, I mean you have an extra neutron, for instance. Then you can have a larger helium or helium isotopes again. So this is a deuterium colliding with another deuterium. Deuterium is a hydrogen with an extra neutron. You can have helium-3, and if you have tritium, which has two extra neutrons are in blue, and if you collide it with a deuterium, you get helium-4. Next page. So this is schematically shows you how a nuclear power plant works. So this is the dome, which is A. So A is the containing structure. Here, these are the control rods. These are the carbon rods. So if you want to have more energy, you pull them more inside the water here, which is in fact this is the main part of the reactor. So all this nuclear fission happens here. Then of course you get a hot stream of water goes to D, which is the steam generator. Then the steam goes to the turbines, which gives us electricity. And of course, because the whole reactor gets hot, so then you need a cooling water, which is the cooling water condenser. This is this one. And then you have a cooling tower. And this should be always near a river or ocean or a sea, and to get water to cool down the reactor here. The next page. Okay, so many of us think that the nuclear power and nuclear energy is something great. We should have it. This is our national pride. Well, I'm one who is against Iran having nuclear even plants, let alone nuclear arms. But not Iran, but all countries in the world, including in the United States, Israel. I don't know, call all the China, which I will show you later, which played extremely important role for proliferation of nuclear energy and nuclear weapons in Asia. So you can see there are many risks, and most of people are not aware. I would say the most dangerous energy that one can have, human unfriendly, and it's not friendly to environment. There are many things like leukemia, cancer, infertility, birth defects. I don't know why we should, the British government and the German government decided to shut down all of their nuclear plants by 2025. Okay? It is my pleasure to have Dr. Akbari here. I would like he comments about the economical issues of nuclear plant. But there is a report by MIT, in fact, on the nuclear issues, and it shows that having nuclear plants and having nuclear fuel, it's not economical, at least up to 2050. And what is the lifetime of a nuclear plant? 40 years. Okay, next page. So again, this is the flashback part, and then I'll come to the current affairs in, I don't know how much time I have, 40 minutes perhaps. So can I have the next page now? So during the late 1960s, there was a general belief by experts, in fact, that these experts, in fact, were economists and a few physicists in Stanford University who decided that Iran soon will be running out of oil. So Shah was then advised to go for nuclear power, and this was also tempting for him, as we know, to become Shah or the king of the kings. So the original plan was to put in work 37, not just one, but 37 nuclear plants by 1990. 37 nuclear power plants. Next page. So Iran signed the NPT on July 1st, 1968, after the treaty was ratified by the Majlis, or the Iranian parliament, as you know, and it went into effect on March 5, 1970. So officially, Iran by March 5, 1970, was a member of the NPT. And this is again extremely important. In the language of Article 4 of the treaty, the NPT recognized Iran's right to develop research, production, and use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes without discrimination, and acquire equipment, materials, and scientific and technological information. This is in NPT. So if there is anything wrong, that is NPT. It's nothing to do with what Iranians are doing right now. So the 1973 war between the Arab countries and Israel, and the subsequent huge increase in the price of oil, as you know, provided the Shah's government with the considerable resources for Iran's development. And because also Iran, at that time, again, Dr. Akbari can comment on that, has a huge economical growth and industrial growth, so they needed lots of energy resources. So at that time, a study by the influential Stanford Research Institute, as I mentioned to you, conducted that Iran would need by year 1990 an electrical capacity of about 200,000 megawatts. Sorry, 20,000 megawatts. Next page. So this is also, again, very interesting. According to the declassified confidential US government documents posted on the Digital National Security, so if you wish you can see it for yourself, in the mid-90s, the US encouraged Iran to expand her non-oil energy base, suggested to the Shah that Iran needed not one, but several, as I mentioned to you, 37 in fact, nuclear reactors to acquire the electrical capacity that the Stanford Research Institute had proposed, and expressed interest in the US companies to participate in Iran's nuclear energy projects. So, of course, in return, Shah had to buy lots of weapons from the United States to recover the cost of oil, because at that time the cost of oil was really high. Of course, not as high as it is right now, but compared to that time. Next page. So, to building nuclear plants, there was bid, and so finally Shah's government awarded the contract to Kraftwerk Union, which is kind of related to Siemens, the same Siemens I was talking about the day before yesterday. Of course, that time was from West Germany. So to have a 1,200 megawatt nuclear reactors at Bushehr. And the work for doing so began in 1974. So this is almost 4 years before the revolution. On July 10, 1978, only 7 months, just 7 months before the revolution, in fact, before the victory of the Islamic Revolution, the final draft of the US-Iran Nuclear Energy Agreement was signed. So the agreement was supposed to facilitate cooperation in the field of nuclear energy and to govern the export and transfer of equipment and material to Iran's nuclear energy program. Okay? Of course, we know what happened. Then we had the revolution, and soon afterward we had the war. So during its war with Iran, Iraq bombed the Bushehr site 6 times, and I had seen Bushehr right after not right, but when I was an undergraduate student in Iran, so they took us to see Bushehr, and it was, do you remember I showed you the dome of the reactor, so that was completely ruined. According to the official of Technischer, I don't know, this is the German name, whatever. So before the bombing, Bushehr 1, which I will show you the picture, the satellite picture of that, could have been completed in about 3 years if it had not been bombed by Iraqis. So this is the satellite picture of Bushehr reactor. I'm not showing you any secrets here. All of these things are available, all the pictures are available on internet. So Bushehr nuclear power plant, this is Bushehr 1 and Bushehr 2. I may have another, perhaps better resolution picture. Anyway, this is another interesting story that I found it out just completely by accident when we had a dinner at a faculty lounge at MIT. And later on, we learned that in fact Shah gave $500 million to 5 universities in the United States and few universities in fact, Europe, mostly the UK universities, to train Iranian students in nuclear physics and nuclear engineering. So initially Shah gave $20 million to MIT, and I talked to the, thank you very much, I talked to the person who was in charge of this program, Mark Moniz, who is at MIT, and in fact he was advisor to Clinton. And the MIT report, in fact, is conducted by Mark Moniz that I mentioned to you, that by time of 2050, still oil is much more economical than nuclear energy. So, and the story is really funny. Most of the students were pro-revolution, of course, no surprise in that. So none of them finished their studies at MIT. And they went back to Iran. So none of them got the PhD from MIT. And so MIT had, and still have, $20 million. And I tried to do something with that, and they told me it's better to back up and not to interfere with these things, because after the hostage crisis, MIT asked the US government that what should we do with this money, and US advised MIT to have it for yourself. Okay, so perhaps the same thing happened, I imagine, to the other universities. Except one person who was not under scholarship by the Iranian government, but by his own. And that person was Dr. Ali Akbar Salehi, who was initially the negotiator of Iran and the IAEA. And soon after his first attempt under the Khatami, I don't know whether he was forced to or he wanted to anyways, he resigned. And he also, for a while, was the head of the Sharif University of Technology. So Ali Akbar Salehi, he's a MIT graduate, he's a very knowledgeable person, and he knows what he's talking about, though he's Hezbollahi, if you wish. Okay, the next page. Okay, so again, to follow the history, so there was, and this was amazing, and I was not aware till very recent that in fact Iran and India also signed a nuclear cooperation. This is amazing to my mind, because remember, India was kind of collaborating with Russia at that time. So it was among the non-aligned countries, of course. And so it is interesting that Iranian and Indian Nuclear Cooperation Treaty was signed in 1975. Of course, then there was a cooperation with French. So Iran also signed in 1974 a contract with the French company Framatome to build 2 950 megawatt pressurized reactors at this site. And they were supposed to build these sites near Karun River, which is near to the border of Iraq, which was not a very good place, as you can imagine. Later on, also, so the place was Darkhovin, in fact. So China also asked to build this in 1992, but this never materialized, again, because of the sensitivity of that particular part of our country. And I'm happy that they didn't do that, to be honest. Next page. Shah also got the first uranium package from South Africa in 1970s. So according to Dr. Akbar Etemad, who was the head of the Iranian Atomic Organization, in fact, from 1972 to 1978, Tehran, so TNRC is Tehran Nuclear Research Center, which is in Amirabad Shomali, carried out experiments in which plutonium. You don't need plutonium for nuclear reactors. You need plutonium for bombs. I mean, you can use it for heavy water reactors, not, it's kind of as a waste, not as a fuel. So this is interesting. I don't know how honest he is. I don't know Dr. Etemad personally, but that's what he's claiming. So in February 1979, as we know, the Islamic Revolution toppled the Shah's government, and at that time, the Bushehr 1, the reactor 1 I showed you on the picture, was almost 90% completed. Bushehr 2 was 60% completed, and Bushehr 2 was 50% completed, and right after the revolution, the interim prime minister, Mehdi Bazargan, decided that Iran did not need nuclear energy, and therefore the work at Bushehr was halted, and the German firm, in fact, left Iran even before that. And again, it is interesting to notice that these reactors, it was kind of the sign of Taghut. I don't know how to translate it in English. So they said, because these facilities are Taghutis, we don't need these facilities. So when the jihadis went to, not jihadis for fighting, for constructing, to villages in Bandar Abbas, they used all the pipes. This is according to one of the nuclear physicists in Iran. Right after the revolution, they used the pipes. We use the pipes for cooling the dome, as I mentioned to you in the schematic picture of the nuclear plants. You need those, and it should be very high quality. So they use those pipes for bringing water for the villages. So, and those pipes were extremely, extremely expensive. Okay, so Now, after the revolution, the nuclear stories, if I want to tell you, these are the sites that now recognized by the Western, let's say, investigators. So the Boucher, of course, was the first, as I mentioned to you, and it still is not functioning. But then we have Ramsar and Bnab, and it was first, in fact, inspected by IAEA in 1997, and they found no evidence whatsoever that they are doing any undeclared military nuclear research in Ramsar and Bnab. In Tehran, of course, we have University of Tehran in Amirabad, as I mentioned to you, and Sharif University of Technology. Later on, I will argue, if I get a chance, that I don't buy this for the reason which I will or may not. I will tell you, depends on the time. And of course, we have Isfahan Nuclear Research Center, and this is the place that enriching the uranium. We have lots of uranium deposits in Yazd, and so basically we can also have our own mines, so deposits or mines of uraniums. But Iranians, at least officially, have never declared that they are enriching the uraniums in Yazd. Next page. Okay, again, the first reconstruction and development of Iran's nuclear facility happened right after the war between Iran and Iraq, and therefore Rafsanjani was thinking that because of the shortage of electricity, we do need nuclear plants. So they went back to the original plan to build nuclear facilities. Of course, Iran asked Germany, and they refused. In fact, Iranians asked all the countries they could, but all of them, because of the pressure of the United States, refused to collaborate with the Iranians. I'll give you the name of the countries in the next page. Baharjan, can I have the next page? So look, Iranians asked the consortium, which consists of the Argentinians, Germany, and Spain. They didn't do that. Then they also asked, what is that? The Soviet Union, finally, and they agreed to cooperate with the Iranians, finally, in March 1919. The next page. And of course, in 1991 also, China came to the picture. China also agreed to help Iran, and they are working really hard with the Iranians to have some nuclear plants in Khorasan, in fact. The next page. That was the picture, and I was talking to you that 25% of Iranian nuclear scientists before the revolution were women. These are the pictures of those women, and look at this. It is so outrageous. چگونه میتوان شوهر را با اتم آشتی داد؟ زنان اتم شناس ایرانی خیاطی و آشپزی را نیز به اندازه کار خویش دوست می‌دارند. This is our society. And unfortunately, as I mentioned to you on Friday night, only 2 of them remain in Iran, and as far as I know, both of them are now retired. Dr. Roghiyeh Bagherzadeh, the first one, and the last one. Okay, next page. Okay, these are the facilities, the nuclear facilities. This is the Lashkarak one, the Boucher one, and this is Arak, and this is Natanz. Next page. Okay, but the crisis, the nuclear crisis, really rise on August 14, 2002, when Ali Reza Jafarzadeh, if perhaps you have heard his name, who was from the Mujahideen Khalq, revealed the facility in Natanz, part of which was underground, and a heavy water facility in Iraq. On November 14, 2004, Iran's chief nuclear negotiator announced a voluntary temporary suspension of its uranium enrichment program. Remember again, enriching is not in violation of NPT treaty. So if there is a problem, the problem is with NPT. Now on November 24, 2004, Iran sought to amend the terms of its agreement with the EU to exclude a handful of the equipment from this deal for research work. This request was dropped 4 days later. On August 8 and August 10, 2005, the Iranian government resumed its conversion of uranium at the Isfahan facility, and still are doing that. And today also Mr. Ahmadinejad announced that we are ready to talk to Europeans, but we are not going to suspend the uranium enrichment. That was, when I came here, the news was only 22 minutes old. So it's hot news, I believe. But on the other hand, Annan said that Iranians are ready for negotiation. Okay, next page. So this is this year, in fact. In January 2006, James Risen, he was a reporter, alleged in his book State of War that in February 2000, a U.S. covert operation, codenamed Operation Merlin, had backfired. In fact, he argued that Americans gave the blueprints originally through Khan and their agents to Iranians to go for nuclear weapons. That's his argument. Instead, the plan may have accelerated in Iran's nuclear program. You know, Americans are very good in, well, like what we see in Iraq, right? No, not fabricating. That's another story. I'm saying the U.S. foreign policy. So, anyways. So on February 4, 2006, the 35-member board of the governors, and I met one of them last month in Italy, and he believed that the Iranians are extremely smart, clever, and master of mischief and negotiation. He said, it is extremely hard for us to beat the Iranians. That was his claim. He's from Norway. On April 11, 2006, Iranian President Mohammad Ahmadinejad, and that perhaps you have heard this, perhaps Iran is the only country who celebrated a highly radioactive cake, which is literally called the yellow cake, and they had a yellow cake weighed 114 kilograms. I don't know why 114, perhaps you know. And it was yellow, and they had it in the universities. So the university students came and ate that yellow cake. So on April 11, 2006, Iranian President Mohammad Ahmadinejad officially announced that Iran had successfully enriched uranium. President Ahmadinejad made the announcement in a televised address. And as you know, he claimed that we are now in the nuclear club, and there was a celebration in Iran for going nuclear. Remember, Pakistanis did the same thing. A year later, there was a devastation earthquake, and 50,000 people died. So I don't know which one we should celebrate. Anyways, apparently people in Iran also think this is in our national pride. I'm completely against it. It's not in our pride at all, and it's not comparable with for which we done for nationalizing our oil wells. But anyways, so the uranium was enriched to 3.5% grade, which is extremely low, using only 164 centrifuges, which is based on the Pakistanis' design. And remember, if you want to have a bomb, a nuclear weapon, you need at least 90% enrichment. And you should have many thousand centrifuges to get the nuclear weapon. But to be honest, nobody knows how many centrifuges Iran has. We know officially they have 164. So, of course, after that, U.S. took a much harsher stand against Iran, and perhaps you know this thing, so I'm not going to go over this, but this is again new, and I gave you the most recent one, which was on June 25, 2006. Iran's foreign minister has rejected demands for a rapid response, and today was in the news that EU said that you are willing to give Iran extra time. The deadline was end of August. They said that we are willing to give Iran extra time. So that's the very recent news. Next page. Okay, so here just briefly to show you how China, and I have to wrap my talk up as soon as possible, but the role of China, if you want to talk about the axis of evil, this is the axis of evil. But why not China? Because China is strong. Why not China? Because China has, the best economical, it's the best economical partner of the US. So China is not bad. It's not the axis of evil, but look what China has done. China helped North Korea. China helped Iran. China helped Afghanistan. China helped Pakistan. In fact, Khan was helped by Chinese. China even also helping Sudan, Libya, Cuba, Syria, and even Iraq. But still, it's our good friend, China. Next page. Okay, so as I mentioned to you, Khan was very important, who was a Pakistani nuclear physicist in Germany and in Netherlands for nuclear proliferation of Pakistan. And he gave the blueprints of these centrifuges, which is the most important issues of, technologically, the most important part of enriching uranium are building the centrifuges. So our centrifuges are, Pakistani design by Khan. Next page. Sure. I'm done. Perhaps this is the one before last. No, that's okay. So that's fine. Let's have this page. So there are two opposite views here. And let me tell you, these two opposite views about Iran is that perhaps you have seen that about the nuclear issue in Iran, never scientists talk about it. No university academicians is talking about the nuclear. So it is not managed and administrated by Iranian universities, but by the defense ministry or by Sepah. And this is really scary. And this is the problem I have. If it was in the hand of in fact, Sharif University or Tehran University, I was much happier. So this is the thing that most of these young scientists, they say, they have never been in Iranian universities. When they got their diploma from high school, they went to Russia, they were picked by Sepah Pasdaran, they went to Russia, they were trained there, and they came back to Iran. And they are young, but they have never been in Iranian university system. And the next page, I guess, that's my conclusion page. Of course, this is not for Iranians, this is for Americans and for the rest of the world. Suppose now, and I believe that this will happen, unfortunately, though I'm not in favor of that. As I mentioned to you, I'm against even nuclear energy, let alone the nuclear bomb. Suppose Iran does have a nuclear weapon. What would be the reaction of the world, particularly the US, if they found out that Iran does have a nuclear weapon? Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much for that very informative survey of the history and the facts about the nuclear picture in Iran. I'm sure we have all a lot of questions about the implications of or your thoughts about where we should go with this, because you suggested that we should not go for nuclear energy at all, and you did not address that question. I'm sure you wanted to leave it for the participants here. I just wanted to say that it is 11:15. If anybody wishes to leave, please do so now. We'll spend about 10 minutes in the question and answer.
First of all, Dr. Nair, I want to ask
Thank you.
It's not to say that the United States government can do whatever they need necessary to protect the United States people, but the governments of other countries have to listen to the United States. This is a very important issue from the international law.
Sure. Yeah, when you are talking about your national interest, you should, believe in other national interests as well. So in that respect, I agree with you. But to answer your question about why Iran joined NPT, it was obvious because Iran didn't have the technology. Once you join NPT, IAEA had to give you the nuclear technology. They have to transfer the nuclear technology to that country. So this is kind of paradoxical. According to NPT, the goal of IAEA is to export, in fact, nuclear technology to all countries all around the world. And that was the reason that Iran joined NPT. That was the main reason. Because Iran, as I mentioned to you, we were lagging behind technologically, everything. We needed that some organization to help us, and I think that was the best thing they did.
May I take another question and come back to you? May I just take another, just to keep our sort of order? I'll come back to you because there aren't too many questions.
First of all, some kind of information. A few months ago, in New York, there was a very extensive article which revealed that the Natanz site was spotted by the Israeli Mossad organization. The information was first offered to Reza Pahlavi. He refused to disseminate it. And then they gave it to Mujahideen, and they held a conference, and they took the credit that they...
Well, I don't believe that really. What I believe is that the Americans knew about it, and they wanted someone to reveal it, and the Mujahideen was ready to do that.
Excuse me. Could you repeat the question?
Sure.
No,
So,
wait.
Wait. So the question was that there was an article in New Yorker a few months ago that Mossad, the secret intelligence service of Israel, was aware of nuclear facilities in Natanz, and they gave it to Reza Pahlavi. He refused for revealing this. He refused to do that, and then Mujahideen agreed that. I think even before Mossad, US, they have lots of satellites. They know what's going on in Iran. They didn't want to reveal it. They said, okay, we want some Iranians to do that, and then Mujahideen agreed to do that.
We'll go back to this question, and I'll come to you.
The other issue is this issue of conspiracy. It's on one part, the Western governments constantly kind of claim that there is a conspiracy beyond whatever claim the government of Iran or authorities in Iran made. But at the same time, if you look at the pattern of behavior and what happened during these 40 years, as we said, during this program, there is an obvious pattern that there may be something behind the scene here to make the resources of this government being wasted on something and then destroy it.
Well, that's possible, but
Did everybody hear the question?
Okay.
Just
So the question is basically on conspiracy theory, which I don't believe, that the U.S. is in fact trying to encourage Iranian to invest on the nuclear energy, and then after they have it, they're going to destroy our resources. I don't believe that. At least we are claiming that we are the smartest nation on the planet, so we shouldn't be that fool. But I think what is important here, and we should respect that, when you call an axis of evil, 3 countries are there, Iraq, Iran, and for some obvious reason, because they didn't want all the countries to be Muslim countries, North Korea, and who is the weakest one? Iraq. Who has the nuclear bomb? North Korea. And what we do, we invade Iraq, the weakest one. And what's left for Iranians? Let's go for nuclear bomb. That would be a safeguard for a regime, for anything. So in fact, in that regard, I agree. If you think it that way, United States is helping Iran to go for the nuclear bomb.
The comment that you made about the people working on the nuclear program in Iran were not educated in Iran, were sent to Russia by SIPO. It's very interesting. This is the first time I'm hearing it.
Yeah, that was the first time I heard it too, but I heard it from the former parliament member.
Okay, is that published or?
Well, that's in a talk by Dr. Haqiqatjou, Fatemeh Haqiqatjou, who was the former parliament member, and she's visiting MIT. She gave a talk about nuclear issues, and you can find it on the ISG, in fact, Iranian Studies Group at MIT website. Or on the Google video, you can listen to her talk, and she visited those places, and she's saying that when she talked to those, nuclear experts, Iranian nuclear experts, all of them were young, 25, 26, 27, and she told me. So that's the only source I have. But I'm sure that none of them were from Sharif University or Tehran University. So they were not trained in the Iranian university system.
No, let me take another question.
A couple of quick notes. The Busher 1, nuclear plant is based on the same design that exploded in Chernobyl, and that makes it extremely unsafe.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's another extremely important issue here, which I'm worried about. And I would really urge, particularly while you are very close to what is the University of California, anyways, I never get the name of that university, but Dr. Najmuddin Meshkat is there, and he is the expert in nuclear safety. And he is the person you should talk to, and he will tell you, for those of you who think that we have a national pride, that what a danger we are facing based on this Russian technology that we have for the Bushehr. So that's a very good point. Thank you for.
And again, even the nuclear plants, even the Western one. Remember that back in 1970, the 3 Mile Island leak, radioactive leak that happened in the United States. That was based on anti-General Electric design. No nuclear plant is safe.
That's right. That's right.
Could I just ask you to clarify, are you opposed to the development of nuclear energy in Iran mainly on the basis of the absence of a scientific core and safety issues?
Well, very good. Not only for that, as I mentioned to you, I'm against nuclear energy all around the world, not just in Iran. In fact, I'm also actively against any nuclear, only there are 2 countries in the whole world that are going for building new nuclear plants. Iran and the US. They are a mirror image of each other. Look at President Bush and Ahmadinejad. So based on that, now there is a problem. They call it, for the nuclear weapons. In fact, now United States has a problem. So for those of you who think that Iran should have a nuclear weapons, United States also is facing a problem for the stewardship of the nuclear weapons, because the lifetime of the nuclear weapons is about 40 years. And they are really scared. I was in a meeting. They don't know what to do with these nuclear weapons. Should they dismantle it? They don't want to do that. Then how they should keep it safe? I don't want another Chernobyl in the Persian Gulf. That's my point. And also, as I mentioned, economically, the lifetime of a nuclear plant is 40 years. And based on a very detailed study by MIT nuclear physicists, it is not in our interest economically to have nuclear plants because still nuclear energy would be one of the the most expensive fuel. Up to 2050, still oil would be the cheapest one. And mostly, I'm also saying this because what should we do about the waste? Unfortunately, we have to admit that we do not have a good Iranian management. We cannot even keep 2 trains to go right. So how can I be sure that nothing happened to the waste? So this is the thing which I'm worried about. And as I mentioned to you, not only in Iran, all over the world, we should, I'm part of also Union of Concerned Scientists. I'm against any nuclear energy, any nuclear facilities in any countries, not just in Iran, in the US, in China, everywhere.
Thank you very much. This is, of course, a very important issue. We really appreciate your input and sharing information. I'm sure you want to continue this conversation, but outside, we need to take a break now. But before you leave, Bahar here has an announcement. We'll see you back here at 11:30.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I debated whether or not it's justified to use this podium for this announcement, but then the justification came to me that Mehragon's purpose in doing this seminar is raising awareness. One of the things that Dr. Nayeri pointed to, especially in this last part where he said he opposes all nuclear energy, is that it has catastrophic disasters for the environment, for the ecology, and for our health. So I thought this is a best opportunity in raising awareness to announce another talk, which is going to be at USD IPJ, October 13th, if you're interested in hearing about the catastrophes that such energy, atomic energy, nuclear energy, ends to, will be the speaker, Dr. Helen Caldicott, who has worked for decades on this particular subject, and that's going to be again at University of San Diego, if you are here in San Diego or nearby, at the Institute for Peace and Justice, October 13th at 7 p.m. You can also go to the USD site to see this. It is a very important matter, much more than terrorism or any other thing that we are fearful of. Thank you.
Well, from nuclear energy to literature. That's a great leap.
He is a visiting professor at Stanford University. He has received his PhD in political science from University of Hawaii. He has taught at Notre Dame de Namur University in California, has been a research fellow at UC Berkeley. He has also taught at Tehran University. He is currently the director of the Iranian Studies program at Stanford University, co-director of Iran Democracy Project at the Hoover Institute, and has published many, many books, which I will only mention a few here, otherwise the list is very long. Among his many publications are King of Shadows, Essays on Iran's Encounter with Modernity, Lost Wisdom, Rethinking Persian Modernity, The Persian Sphinx, Amir Abbas Hoveyda and the Riddle of the Iranian Revolution, Modernity and Its Foes in Iran, Tales of Two Cities, a Persian memoir, which was a bestseller, on democracy and socialism. He is currently working on a number of projects, one of which is entitled Peacock Prince, a political biography of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Shah of Iran. Dr. Abbas Milani will speak to us today on Persian in Western Canon. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Milani.
That was a nice out-of-breath introduction by Bahar. I'm not holding my breath for hearing any more cell phones ring. Please turn them off, and welcome Dr. Milani.
Good morning. Thank you for coming to this English discussion. People seem to have an aversion to English when Iranians are around. Let me begin by saying that there was a small error in the program. It isn't Persian in the canon. It says Persian in canon, but it should be Persia in the Western canon. Let me tell you briefly what I mean by the canon and why the discussion of the canon is important. And then we'll talk about Iran's presence in the canon. In recent 2 decades, essentially beginning around 1970, I think it's now 3 decades, something began in American universities that is called the canon wars. The canon refers to books that are considered to be the most fundamentally important texts of a culture. So when we talk about Western canon, we're talking about books that are taught to be, assumed to be the most important books. The University of Chicago at one time published a series called The Great Books. There were in almost all universities, if you have been trained in this country, if you've gone to university in this country, you would remember there were almost at all universities something called Western civilization and Western literature. In those books, in those classes, the purpose was to introduce students to the 50, 100, depending on where you went, most important texts. These were taught to be, in the words of one famous American writer, Saul Bellow, said the canon is the best that the best minds have created. Now, this used to work better before they fixed it. When American universities, can we do something about this? I think it's, that's okay. When in 60s, late 60s, the American universities began to be opened to minorities, racial minorities, ethnic minorities, sexual minorities, the canon became under question. In fact, it began, many would say, that the canon wars began at Stanford University. Stanford used to have a course called The Great Text of Western Civilization, and when Stanford was open to minority students, and when more women began to come to the university, when gays and lesbians found their way to the university in greater numbers, they began to question this. And they said, what is now known as the canon is really the writings of dead white men. And that the other books written by white men. Books written by women, books written by other religious groups is completely missing. And that what you're getting in this classes is not really world civilization, but it is Western civilization, and it is Western civilization from the point of view of white men. So the greatest works that were written by religious, for example, minorities, some of the works that were written by women, for example, were completely absent. When the University of Chicago published its great books, amongst its 50 great books, there wasn't a single book that was by a woman or by someone outside the West. So the canon wars began, and people began to suggest that we need to expand this. We need to introduce American students to a wider variety of texts. For example, people began to talk about why there is never any mention of some of the great works of the Persian culture. We're talking about Iran, and thus there were many other references, but in the specific case we're talking about Iran. Why aren't works that have come out of that tradition ever part of the canon? And that isn't simply out of nationalist pride that we would say, for example, a work of Persian poet must be part of the canon because we have students at Stanford or students at UCLA. The argument was and is that these are in fact the best that the best have produced. In other words, if you're trying to teach students about mythology, why only teach them Homer and not Shakespeare, not Ferdowsi? Why is there never a mention of Shahnameh in the courses that are taught, and even mythology? I suggest you go back and check some of the reading books, reading lists and classes on mythology. Even there, Shahnameh was missing. And it's not because there wasn't a translation of it. There was a translation. It wasn't a good translation. We now have a very good translation. Dick Davis has translated it. But that wasn't really the reason. Why was there never any poetry of Hafiz, for example? Many critics, Western critics, have said that Hafiz is on par with Shakespeare. Why was there never a work of Sa'di? Emerson, the great American intellectual, many people would say Emerson is the single most influential American intellectual. He's often called the American intellectual. American intellectualism is said began with Emerson. If you read Emerson's writing, if you read his notebooks, Emerson is imbued with an absolute love of Hafiz and Sa'di. He says Sa'di is comparable to the Bible. He says the only book I can compare Sa'di with in terms of the depth of his knowledge, the depth of his understanding of the human soul is the Bible. So the arguments began to be made about the necessity of opening up what we call the canon. The canon has to be more inclusive. The canon has to include these great works. If you, for example, are talking about religious books of importance, students are invariably taught some Bible. But the Gathas of the Zoroastrian faith, I think, are singularly important in the development of religious thought in Judaism, in Christianity, in Islam, in almost every religious thought that has come after Zoroastrianism. And there were translations of Gathas, and if they weren't, there should have been, because there were scholars who were writing about the importance of Zoroastrianism in the development of other religions, Western religions. So why not some of the Gathas next to the Bible? Why not some of the Quran? Whether you like Islam or you don't, Islam right now is the faith of about a quarter of humanity. And it has had an impact. And it is a book that is clearly canonical in terms of its influence. So one part of this canonical debate, or Western, or the canon wars, was what should be included in it? And the other question that we now need to ask ourselves is, how is Iran represented in the canon that exists and existed before this expansion? In other words, how is Persia and Persian, how is Iran and Iranian identity represented in the canonical works that exist and are taught? This is before the expansion I'm talking about. And I think if we look there, we will find that Persia and Iran are particularly in the early phase of Western culture. In other words, the time of Homer, Christ, Aristotle, from, let's say, 700 BC to 400 AC, from the time of Homer to the time of Saint Augustine. This is sort of this pivotal age in the development of Western canon. Most of the most important works of the Western canon were written in this period. If we go to these texts, I think we will be surprised by how extensive Iran is present in them. And we will also be surprised by some of the ways these canonical works have presented Iran. Before we do this, however, I think there is a legitimate question to ask. Why should we be spending Sunday morning, and we could be out walking in beautiful San Diego beaches? Why should we be spending our morning in this closed, claustrophobic room talking about Persia and the Western canon? What is the necessity? Why should we waste our time doing this? I think that's a very legitimate question. And if we can't answer it, we should take a hike. I think that there is something of a consensus that what we call identity, both individual and national, is partly our memories, partly our shared experiences with others, partly the traces of our past. And I dare say that the Iranian identity has never been as much under attack or in a crisis as it is today. Maybe the only time that I can see that is comparable in terms of the nature of the threat is the first 200 years after the Arab invasion. It is in that period where some people say that the first encounter between Iran and the West were also a period of serious crisis. The first time Iranians came into an encounter with the West. But I don't think we know enough about Iran of that period. There's so little that we know conclusively about that period. But we do know a fair amount about the Arab invasion. And I think there's some truly eerie similarities between both the nature of the crisis and the way Iranians responded to it. So right now, I think Iranian identity, for us in exile, is being challenged by several sources. First, internally, it is being challenged by the Islamic Republic of Iran, because the Islamic Republic of Iran wants to emphasize the Islamic element of our identity to the detriment of the pre-Islamic period. The Islamic Republic is making the same mistake that the Pahlavi regime made. The Pahlavi regime tried to emphasize only the pre-Persian, particularly in the last 10 years of the Shah's rule. The 2,500-year celebration, if you read the literature of those, for example, the writings of Shafa and the committee that began this thing, the celebration, one of the primary motives was to emphasize the pre-Islamic phase and undermine, if you will, the Islamic. But I think the reality is that we now have a dual identity. We have an identity that is partially Islamic, quote unquote, and partially pre-Islamic. And I say Islamic, quote unquote, because, as I will try to explain briefly, what we know in Iran as Islam is a uniquely Iranian version of Islam. And many scholars have argued that the Islam that is practiced in Iran, the Islam that was developed by Iran and went from Iran to, for example, Pakistan and India, was a very unique version of Islam. It is as much Persian as it is Islamic. So one source of the attack is the Islamic Republic and its attempt to undermine, and I think they are beginning to recognize that that's a losing battle. The attempt to, for example, kill Nowruz or kill Charshamba Suri only work to reinvigorate the interest in these things. And the attempt to destroy Ferdowsi's relics, I think they have now recognized that that's not going to happen, that this is a culture that has survived 1,000 years, and it can survive Khalkhali and his cohorts. The other challenge is the challenge from what we call globalism. Whether we like the pattern or what some historians call the global reach of modernity, there is a cultural phenomenon that is happening around the world that is trying to homogenize the world, that is trying to make the world look much more alike, that is trying to export cultural icons and cultural values, even the language of the West, to the world. The ways of the Western societies are now being expanded, I think, in an incredible pace. If you believe Fukuyama in his book, The End of History, we have come, Fukuyama says, literally to the end of history, because history was when there were competing ideas fighting with one another. He claims, of course, he has now been proven very wrong because he wrote this before September 11 and before all of this. I think he now wishes he never written this. But his claim was that there is this consensus, international consensus on how we want to live. And how we want to live is essentially more or less around the Western model. So there is that global challenge, secondly. Third, there is a challenge for us who live in diaspora. Our everyday lives have increasingly little to do with our Iranian identity, with Iranian experience. And if we are to preserve any of that identity, both as a nation and as a diaspora, I think we need to have a serious reckoning with our own past. We need to understand our own past. And I think if we understand our own past, understand it critically, and if we can avoid the two great temptations that have existed in the last 100 years, we will come away a very different people and a different consciousness. The two temptations, or the two dangers, are essentially the two sides of the same coin, I think. They look very different, but they're really very much part of the same pathology. And what I mean is, on the one hand, the extreme nationalism that says, Honar nazd Iraniyan ast bas, all that is good in the world has come from Iran. Everybody else in the world has been eating off our table for 2,500 years, and they keep denying us our rights. The phenomena that was comically depicted in my big fat Greek wedding. You could take that Greek father and replace myself, and you would be happy. You would be depicting me 90% of the time. So that's one danger. The other danger is the psychology that says Iran has produced nothing that is good. Iran is a basic pit of despotism and ignorance. It has never had much to offer in the world. We haven't produced much, and we certainly haven't produced anything in the last 1,000 years. And all we need to do now is forget about this Persianness and try to become Western. The infamous words of Taqizadeh, which he never outlived, although he tried to explain it, his famous phrase that we have to become in our bone and blood Western, is sort of the epitome of this psychology. And it is the psychology, the internalized psychology of a colonized people. Franz Fanon, the famous psychologist, has written in several of his books that colonialism best succeeds when it convinces the conquered people that they have nothing to offer to the world, and that the only salvation for them is to emulate, to model themselves after the white man. The Michael Jackson phenomena, the phenomena of a person that tries to even change the color of his skin so that the sahibs and the masters approve of him. That culturally, in our midst, manifests itself in this self-loathing that we find. And the self-loathing, the extreme self-loathing that some Persians have, is the other side of this pathological self-congratulating. I think both of them are a wrong temptation. If we look in our history, I think we will come away with the notion that Persia has had, Iran has had, one of the most enduring, one of the most productive, one of the most creative, but also one of the most troubled cultures of any civilization. It is truly one of the great civilizations of the world. And nothing emphasizes this as well as the Western canon in its inception. In other words, if you want the best proof of this greatness, you don't need to look to Mr. Muqaddam or Muqaddam, as he called himself, or Zabih Behruz, although some of their writings are great. You can find it, some of the traces, in the Western canon. And because we have very limited time, I'm going to concentrate my comments on the most, as I said, the earliest signs of the Western canon. When we talk about the Western canon, these are some of the great books that almost everybody accepts to be the great canonical, the great pivotal works. One is Herodotus. Herodotus' works called histories. The second is the Bible. The third are what we call classical tragedies of Greece. The fourth are St. Augustine's writing. St. Augustine is a 4th century theologian who comes from the northern tip of Africa and becomes the theorist, the theologist of Catholicism and Christianity for 1,000 years. In other words, from his life, let's say 400 to 1400, where you have the beginning of what we call the Renaissance or the modernity, Augustine's views were clearly the dominant view. So let's look at these texts and see how Iran is presented in them, how Persia is presented in them. Let's begin with the earliest. The earliest of these is Herodotus. Herodotus' histories. There is some evidence, first of all, that Herodotus was himself a Persian. A fictional rendition of this, but a well-researched fictional rendition of this can be found in Gore Vidal's book called Creation. Gore Vidal is well known for historical novels. And by historical novels, he means the kind of novel where he goes and does deep research on a phenomena, on a period, on a character, and then writes a novel about it. He's written, for example, a very famous novel about Abe Lincoln, where he questions almost everything we know about Abe Lincoln. He's written a great novel called Burr, where he basically undermines almost everything we know about the early American Revolution. Raymond Burr was a person that was killed in a duel, and the characters in this novel are Jefferson, Washington, Raymond Burr, Hamilton, Madison. And the image he gives is a very different image. It's a fictional image, but it's a historical fiction. And it's a good historical fiction. In there, he argues that, Gore Vidal argues that Herodotus was Persian. But be that as it may, the Histories is generally thought to be the first book of Western civilization. It is also, according to Herodotus himself, an account of how the West came to know itself as the West. Because we now take it for granted that there is something called the West and there is something called the East. There is an Orient and there is an Occident. Rudyard Kipling famously said, "The East is the East and the West is the West and the twain shall never meet." In other words, that's how fundamentally different these two are. When did this consciousness begin? When did people in the West begin to think that they are different from the other? Well, in the West, we know where that began. Herodotus basically says that the consciousness of the West, of itself, first of all, as an entity, as something that shares a number of things together, and then an entity that is different from this other, takes place in the Greece encounter with Persia. In other words, Westernness was defined in opposition to, in distinction with, Persianness. And Herodotus's book is essentially an account of these wars. And Herodotus, even if Gore Vidal is right, in the book has no love lost for Iranians. He calls them barbarians, although by barbarian he really literally simply meant a linguistic phenomenon. He meant someone who babbles on in a different language than the Greeks. The Greeks thought that their language was the language of culture and civilization. If people who didn't speak the language were barbarians. But of these barbarians, he has some very interesting things to say. And some of it is very complimentary, some of it is not very complimentary. But the stuff that he says that is complimentary is almost exactly the opposite of what we now think of ourselves. He says Iranians have an incredible curiosity about the world. They have an scientific inquisitiveness about the world that he says we don't have, the Greeks don't have. We tend to think that science began in the West. In the 20th century, Max Weber, a famous sociologist, wrote a book saying that the West and the East are different, and the difference is in the East, they have developed a spirituality. In the West, we have developed philosophy and science. This is the introduction to his very famous book. It's available in Persian as well, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. In that very brief introduction, he says, we are very different than the Easterners, and he describes it. He says, in one case, for example, we develop science, they develop spirituality. They are interested in the inward journey of humans. We, the West, are interested in the outer journey. We develop science and discover the world. They develop the soul and discover Sufism, for example. In Herodotus, it's the other way around. Herodotus says these Persians have an enormous curiosity. They are traveling, he says, all over Asia. They have sent their explorers all over Asia to map out all the rivers in the world. And he describes their attempt to build what later became the Suez Canal. He talks about how they have a very elaborate system of organization. He says very different than ours. He talks about the system of monarchy that they have there that is completely different from the West and the way the West operates. And many other things. He talks about how they eat differently. I think I told you one time, maybe I didn't, I forgot, but he describes how in one case, one of the Greek kings asks a soothsayer, he said, should I attack Iran? And the soothsayer says, no, the stars are not good, don't attack them now. He says, why? He says, well, if you lose, you lose, and it's not very good. If you win, they will learn to eat figs, and they have never discovered figs, and there will be less figs in the world than there are now. So one time we got spared an invasion by the Greeks because we didn't eat figs, and the Greeks ate it. But all in all, when you read Herodotus, and incidentally, the parts of Herodotus which are about Iran have been translated into Persian. They've been translated into Persian by Fuad Rouhani, one of the true great unsung intellectual heroes of 20th century Iran. This is a man that was truly a model of honesty and a model of decency. He was in charge of oil negotiations in Iran for almost 40 years, and he died a very, very relatively poor man. If it wasn't because of his daughters, he would probably die in poverty. And then you have other members of the oil company who have been living rather largely on their illicit gains for the last 30 years. When you saw him, you saw, but he was also a great translator, a great scholar. He wrote that probably one of the best introductions to the Quran. He's written it in 2 languages. Unfortunately, the book is hard to find, and he was afraid of the Islamic Republic, and he published it under a pseudonym. But it talks about, it describes almost every category of thought that exists in the Quran. In other words, if you want to know what the Quran says about women, you open his book and you open it to the page on the woman, and all the ayahs and the surahs that are about that are described. And he's done it with absolute impartiality, although he was a Baha'i. Fuad Rouhani. Fuad Rouhani, the pseudonym, he uses 2 different pseudonyms. For the English, he uses Sadiq, and for the Persian, I don't remember. I'm very sorry. I don't. Pardon me?
Is it Sadiq Rouhani?
No, Sadiq. Sadiq is, he uses Sadiq as his last name. The book was published by Ibex, and no more than, from what I understand, no more than 500 copies of it were published. And both in Persian and English, it is truly a great work. But he has also translated all the parts in Herodotus that are about Iran. It is called Iranian dar Tarikh Herodot. And if you can find it, he's also a very, very precise translator. So you can be sure that you're getting what the book actually said and not what the translator wanted the book to say. Because that's the problem we have with a lot of our translations. Some of our, and I'm not talking about Zabiullah Mansouri, who used to invent books and invent authors. Zabiullah Mansouri was a fantastic character. His most famous story I'll tell you so that the monotony of talking about Herodotus will be broken. He wrote a book, a 600-page book on Mullah Sadra. And the book was supposedly by a French scholar called Henri Corbin. Corbin is a great scholar, was a great scholar. And Corbin comes to Iran. Corbin used to be the head of Anjuman Iran Faransé. This is where I used to give my exams, and when I was at elementary school, and it used to bring terror to my heart to go to Anjuman Iran Faransé to give our exams. Then little did I know that Corbin was at the time the president of that place. So Corbin comes to Iran and they say, your book on Henri Corbin is published. He says, what book? I said, well, Zabiullah Mansouri has published a 500-page book. He says, I never wrote a book on Henri Corbin. And so he says, I really want to meet this guy, Zabiullah Mansouri. They go to Zabiullah Mansouri, and now Zabiullah Mansouri used to work for Khandaniha, and they describe how he used to come to work every day, put on his pajamas, and sit in the back and write out in hand his translation. He's translated 600 books. He claimed to have written 1,200. But scholars have been able to find only 600. And, he was a bestseller, don't laugh about it. I think Mansouri has sold more books. I don't think I can say categorically. Mansouri has sold more books than any other Iranian translator, writer, poet, historian in modern times. 600 books. And he used to sell a lot. Some of you have read some of his work, I'm sure. The one about Sabbah, for example, another one of his books that is completely fictional. The author doesn't exist. Anyway, Korban says, I want to meet this guy. They go to Mansouri and say, Korban wants to meet you. He says, no, I thought he was dead. And unfortunately, he wasn't dead. But Mansouri kept creating his works anyway. For other Rouhani's translation is not Zabiullah Mansouri. It's really a very, very good translation. I have to ask a question from you. When do we have to end?
We end at 12:30.
12.
To take allowed 10 minutes.
Oh, so 12:20.
15 minutes.
Oh, okay. No, I have to finish sooner if you want 10 minutes. Okay. The other, as I said, the other book of probably the single most important book in the canon in terms of its impact in subsequent literature is the Bible, both in terms of the impact it had in the literature from its inception to 1500, and from 1500 when it was first translated into English. The King James Bible that was translated into English, the impact it had, for example, on the English language, the development of the English language. Although they killed the person who translated it, but the book became a very, very important book. And in the Bible, again, I think I can say with some certainty that there is, other than Jews, no other nation that is praised as much as Persians. And there is absolutely no other human being, other than the prophets, who is praised as much as Kurosh. Kurosh is referred to as Yahweh's anointed, which is as close as it comes to saying that he was a prophet. They described his freeing of the Jews from the Babylonian captivity, and they describe his the fact that he complied by the Lord's edict to rebuild Jerusalem. And they go on describing about this. And the notion of Kurosh's role in all of this was very much an issue that spread throughout the world. It wasn't something that was hidden. I talked about the negative side of the 2,500-year celebration in the sense that it took something on that it couldn't do and it wasn't wise to do. But in that process, they published a lot of interesting articles and books during the 2,500. Going towards the 2,500, they started something called Acta Iranica. Acta Iranica brought together scholarly articles. And in one of those Acta Iranica articles, it talks about how the praise of Kurosh has gone as far as being repeated in Icelandic sagas. The sagas of Iceland refer to Kurosh and his role in all of this. In other words, this issue wasn't something that was limited in terms of its scope. It became a rather global, international phenomenon. Now, I'm going to try to summarize what I have to say. If you go to Zoroastrianism and talk about the impact of Zoroastrianism on international, on different religions and different intellectual traditions, I think you would come away with the same conclusion that Harold Bloom came away with. Harold Bloom is another unusual writer. He has, in fact, written 600 books, but he's not like Zabiullah Mansouri. He's a very, very serious critic, very serious scholar. He's still alive. He has a book that he published 3 years ago. It's called Omens of Millennium. This was around the time where everybody was worried about what would happen when the year 2000 came. The computers are going to crash. The world is going to come to an end. Some people began buying water and went to caves because it was predicted in the book, in the apocalypse, that the apocalypse shall happen. In there, he talks about some of the issues, some of the ideas, some of the concepts that have come from Zoroastrianism into Christianity and other religions. And the list is truly incredible. He claims the idea of monotheism, the idea of angels, the idea of Satan, the idea of life after death, the idea of a Messiah, the idea of a millennium, the significance of a millennium, all come from Zoroastrianism. He says 20th century, the last half of 20th century, might as well be called the age of the resurrection of Zoroastrianism. I'm almost verbatim quoting him there. And he traces some of these ideas. The idea that Satan, the idea that the very notion of of heaven and hell first occurred in Zoroastrianism. The idea that the first sacred book wherein dream interpretation is used, wherein the idea that dreams have significance beyond their own personal limited meaning, and that they're a kind of a window to a cosmos, occurs in Zoroastrianism. These are just some of the ideas that he talks about. There are a couple of other books that have tried to mention the influence that this has had. Again, I'll just make, I have only 5 minutes, let me summarize it this way. I think if you ask most historians, most scholars today, and say, what are the most important problems of our time today? What are the key issues today? I think you will have a large number of them say that the three main problems or issues that we face, one is the rise of religion and fundamentalism, and the notion that cultures are in conflict, as for example Samuel Huntington says, clash of civilization, or cultures can live together peacefully. In other words, a sense of multiculturalism. The third idea is the idea of messianism, the idea that there will be a Messiah that comes from outside. If you look at the influences that Iran has had on the development of religions, some of which I mentioned, if you look into the development, the influence that, for example, Mitraism has had, the influence that Mani has had in the development of Christian theology, the development of Christian ritual, I think you would come away with the conclusion that few cultures have had as much an influence in the development of religion. Because, again, look at the number of religious ideas and religious movements and religions that have come from Iran. And we didn't get a chance to talk about how the golden age of Islam, where Islam expands itself and where Islam becomes a very important force in making and facilitating the Renaissance in Europe, the role that the Iranians played in that phenomenon Again, Yar Shater has a very, very small book of about 130 pages where he simply names some of the Iranian astronomers, mathematicians, historians, linguists, theologians who helped develop Islamic thought in this period. So Islam, both in its fundamentalist version, the Ghazali version, and in its most soft version, the Sufi version, many historians would say are a great creation of Islam, of Iran. Shiism, the same Henri Corbin that we talked about. Henri Corbin has a 4-volume book called, it's in French only, unfortunately, it is called Islam, Iranian Islam, where it's essentially about Shiism and talks about how Shiism is, to a great extent, the result of Iranian pre-Islamic sentiments. And suffice it, to get a sense of all of these, it suffices if you just read Augustine's Confessions. Augustine, as I said, is the person that really shaped theology for Christianity for 1,000 years. And his Confession is definitely one of the 50 great books. It is one of the canonical books. And I would also vote for it, that if you're going to read 50 books in your life, that should be one of them. Not because it praises Iran, but also because it talks about the influence that Zoroastrianism and Mani's ideas had in his early development. Other historians have later said that what he talks about as the early influence is really his own misunderstanding of his own ideas, because those ideas, in other words, this Manichaean division of the world into good and evil, this absolute sense of the world, this absolute idea that the body is a source of sin and that the soul is what gives you salvation, many of his fundamental ideas that were Christian ideas were also, according to these historians, can be, according to these historians, rooted in Zoroastrian or Manichaean ideas. My time is up, and I think I would prefer to try to answer, in what little time we have left, your questions than ramble on.
Thank you very much, Dr. Milani. I'm sure that we could be here another 15 days to spread this landscape that he has painted with questions. We only have 15 minutes. Anybody wants to leave, would you please do so now? And please confine your questions to make them brief and to the point so that we can take as many as we can. Thank you. So, yes? The suggestion is that we extend the session by 5 minutes. I don't have any problem. I'll ask Dr. Milani if he's willing to. And I've now heard twice this question that they would like Dr. Milani to summarize, to sort of give a conclusion to his talk. Maybe we can ask him to do that before we take questions. Would you?
Of course. But I'm going to have that 5 minutes. I'm going to take 1 minute of it to tell you of an experience I had. When I was at the law school, Tehran University, we started a lecture series, and one of the people we invited was Fardid, the great, infamous philosopher, Heideggerian. And he came and began speaking, and he began at 7 o'clock, and he was supposed to finish at 8. By 8:30, I think, 8:45, he got one of these, saying that you have 5 minutes. He looked at it, he put it down, and continued. After about another 45 minutes, he got another note, he put it down. And another 15 minutes, he got a more serious note. They said, the police is outside. We need to close. And Fardi put it down. He said, look, I haven't had ears to speak to for about 1.5 years. If you think I'm going to leave now, you're mistaken. So he left with the promise that we will all come back next week and listen. So I will summarize it if you promise to come back next week and let me continue. What I was going to go on and discuss was some of the other traces that Persians, Iranians have had in Western canon. And my task was to talk about this up to the Renaissance, all the way up to Shakespeare. There's fascinating stories about how the West, for example, covered Iran in the West on the eve of the Renaissance. There's a wonderful book, the Iranian version of Baradaran Omidvar. Many of you do not remember, you're not old enough, but Baradaran Omidvar were the only Iranian world travelers. And then there was some talk that they've never left their home, and all of these pictures were in the zoo. But there was a man in England by the name of Mandeville. Mandeville was probably the author of the first international bestseller. Mandeville published something about his travels around the world, from China to Iran to Africa. And it later turned out that he had never left his village in England, and it was all fabricated. But the book was a bestseller, and it really reflected the way Europe thought about Iran on the eve of the Renaissance. Both in Mandeville and in Shakespeare, and again, Shakespeare is generally accepted as to be the heart of the Western canon. The same Harold Bloom that I referred to talks about Shakespeare as the heart, the beginning, and the end of the Western canon. And the way Iran is presented in there is very, very interesting. It is very distinct from the Muslims. It's very distinct from the Turks, for example. It's very distinct from the Moors. Persians have a very unique place. And other than Europeans and Italians, for example, I don't think there is any culture that is mentioned as often and invariably favorably as Iran is in Shakespeare. We have some evidence that this might be because of two things. One is the Shirley brothers came back to Iran, and they might have been a neighbor of Shakespeare, or someone close to them might have been a neighbor of Shakespeare. And the other evidence is that a play that was written about Iran at the time came to Arden, when Shakespeare was there, and he might have seen that, but it's a very unusual thing. The conclusion of it was, my conclusion of this is that we need to begin rethinking our history, and we need to rethink it with our own minds, not through Western eyes, not through Islamic eyes, not through self-loathing eyes, not through self-aggrandizing eyes, but a critical self-appraisal as a nation. And I think the only way we are going to survive modernity is through this critical self-cognition. The first generation of Iranian modernists, I think, were very mistaken in assuming that Iranian modernity goes through Europe, and that Iranian modernity means emulating Europe. But I think modernity is not European. Modernity is a global phenomenon. It's a human experience. And in Europe, the experience of modernity, the Renaissance that was at the core of modernity, began with a critical self-understanding of the West, of going back to their own roots and reappraising themselves. The way an individual who suffers, for example, from depression or other forms of mental stress, oftentimes one of the ways that psychologists try to help them is to help them go through their own lives and find where the trauma began, how the trauma began. I think we are now, as a nation, a traumatized people. And our sense of identity is under so much attack and under such a barrage, not just from Hollywood films, from books, from either these self-loathers or self-aggrandizers, that if we are to survive this modernity, and I think we can, because I do believe that this is a country that is very resilient, this is a country that learns to fight and learns to learn. Again, to go back at the beginning, one of the things that Herodotus says about Iran is that this is a very tricky nation. They study everything that comes on their way, and then they make it their own. they find a way of making it their own. Assimilation has been one of the common, probably most important characteristics of Iran. Some people say the endurance of Iran has been this ability to assimilate. The ability to assimilate can go to extreme, and then you can lose all sense of identity. Assimilation can be a kind of complete absorption into the other, or assimilation can be keeping the best that you have and being willing to combine it with the best that you learn from others. That's what we need to do, I think, as a nation. And the first step to do that, or one of the first steps, the other step is also to learn what is good around the world. That's why in these meetings, it has to be that people come and listen to English, because English is a language that allows you a window into this. The notion that people can live in Los Angeles and never learn to speak English and be comfortable with English is a disservice to them, to their children, to this notion of identity. So if we are to survive it, and I'm very convinced that we are going to survive it, because after all, what other nation will spend Sunday morning in San Diego talking about Persian canon and Iran's role in the Western canon? This meeting is a testimony to the resilience and the willingness and the readiness of this culture to make this transition, I think.
All right, on that note of optimism with an English-speaking audience, let us begin the questions. You, sir.
Iran has been known to, or Iranians to be good administrators, whether at the time of the Mongols or Arabs, they actually conquered the conqueror. And there was a book written by what how they came to rule in a just way. And then when you compare Machiavelli to the prince, do you think this was related? Did Machiavelli take the ideas from his own works, or was it vice versa?
I think that, first of all, about the first point that you're making, Iranians are known to be good administrators, but there's also an image that was created, in fact, first by Herodotus. Herodotus is the first person to give this lie. And the lie was that, and Greek historians and Egyptian historians worked together to do this. The lengthier version of this can be found in this book on ancient Persia by the French historian Brian. And the story that the Western, that Herodotus gives and then Egyptians repeat, is that when the Persians came to Egypt, they destroyed all local religions and they forced the Egyptians to take Iranian ways, and that the Persian king walked into the great hall of the Greek deities and broke the calf, the famous calf, and the Iranians stole 2,500 of the idols and shipped it back to Iran. This is the version of the story that they give. Recent scholarship, and by recent I mean the last 70 years, the foundational tablets found in Persepolis have indicated that, in fact, that the opposite was the case. That Iranians were very good at what we today call multiculturalism, allowing the conquered, so-called, to continue their cultural ways, to continue their language. So I think that is very much the point. And one of the things that, for example, Yashatir talks about in his art book is about the role of Iranians in the administration, the famous prime ministers that were, important in the king's and in the caliph's family. Now, I have never studied Machiavelli's sources of Machiavelli's writing. I have read The Prince, and I think it's one of the most important books in commencing modernity. Machiavelli is said to be the first social scientist, for example. Contrary to the impression that people have of him as being Machiavellian, he's a very serious thinker. There is now literally a revival of Machiavelli in the West, in the sense of reappraising him. But so I have no study, no expertise on the sources of Machiavelli's thought. But you're absolutely right. There are many, many, many similarities, fundamental similarities between the approach that Hoja Nizam in Siyasatnameh suggests and Machiavelli's, because both of them are advice to, not just because they're advice to the prince, but the basic idea that the prince, for example, needs to be as much loved as feared. And if there is a choice, better go with fear than with love. It's almost verbatim what you can find in Hoja Nizam's work as well. So there are similarities, but I've never studied it. I have no expertise in it, and I don't know of anyone who's studied this, as far as I know.
You mentioned about the Iranian developed a special version of Islam, and these days we're seeing a lot of murters and shahadat, and there are a couple of papers that say these murters coming from Imam Hussein and from Siyawash Kushun. Do you think this is a special thing that has been developed by Iranian that brings Siyawash Kushun to Islam and bring that shahadat?
If everybody who has a question could please stand up so we won't have to repeat the question, you'll be better heard. But if you could please repeat his question.
The question was that now that there is a discussion about Islam and the revival of Islam, there is some discussion of the whole notion of martyrdom and this suicide bombers, martyrs seekers, and that there are some papers who suggest the origins of this martyrdom seeking is in fact in rituals like the Siyawashun and things of that sort. You know, with the exception of Mujahideen during the early days of the revolution, I don't know of any Iranian who has been a suicide bomber. Suicide bombing has been much, much more Pakistani, Arab, Egyptian phenomena than it's been Persian. And even after the early phase where Mujahideen did it and killed a number of authorities with it, they even stopped. The version of the Islam that I was referring to is both three versions in a sense. Sufism, Sunni thought, and Shiite thought. A lot of people forget that Iran was predominantly Sunni up to the Safavid period. It was the Safavid who decided, incredible as it may seem, to convert the whole nation and use force to do it, and there was a lot of resistance to it. But before Shiism came, there was Sunnis. And if you look at the development of Islamic thought during the Golden Age, as I said, you will find that many, many of the primary theorists were in fact Iranians. And that Shiism then is much, much more, you know, last year, every time somebody's phone rang, I drank a glass of water. Now, I drink again too, the phones that keep ringing. I really, that was the discussion that I was having on a much larger scale. But the notion of Hussein, I think the aspect of Hussein that is much more troubling is the notion that is also very important in Shiism, and that's the idea that the minority, regardless of being a minority, is right. And if you stand up for your right, even if you are a minority, you will have won victory. One of the things that Shiism develops, and Ayat in his book about Islamic thought talks about this, is this view that is truly problematic in philosophy and development of science, for example. Shiism develops the theory that if you're right, you're a minority. And if you're a minority, you're right. It's a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because they were so much in a minority, there are several hadiths that says the Shia of Ali will always be a minority. And people like Inayat talk about it, and I think that's very accurate, that that was a problem for the development of modernity within Islam. But if you look in the history of Islam, the only version of Islam that developed in Iran that was very much in the tradition of the martyrdom seekers was the Ismailis. The Ismailis were the ones who were willing to die, and the famous anecdote. The rest of them, my sense of the Iranian culture, and many people have written about this, many people have written about this, is that if there is a character that defines Persian culture, it is not the martyr, it is the rend. And rend is not someone who goes and kills himself and kills innocent people with it. There's a lot of complexity to what a rend does. And if the people who say rend is a characteristic of a culture, the soul of the Persian culture, then I think martyrdom seekers are not essential to that idea.
Let me see.
Something about understanding our culture. The new science of consciousness, says today that we define and we create ourselves and the world outside of us based on what we think and believe. Don't you think if we put our attention so much in the past to understand the past, what I'm hearing all the time, we going deeply more and more and indulging in the past, and it seems this is a never-ending story. And if you are putting all our attention and energy in the past, aren't we going to keep recreating the past? And the future that we're talking about, it is that which has never been existed, and it's up to us to create that from a place out of the past, out of no current level of our consciousness. So what would it take for us as a nation, as a community, to put our attention for what we want to create, the life we want to live, and start being in action in that direction now?
Well, I don't know what theories of psychology and consciousness you're talking about, so I can't answer to that. But the theories of development or psychology, both individual and national, that I know, they almost consensually agree that while the present is very crucial, the past is also very important. Without an understanding of the past, you will keep repeating the mistakes of the past. That's, for example, a great lesson that I think nations learn and individuals learn. And if we only, I talked about two temptations, two dangers. One, the self-loathing, and then the self-aggrandizing. Both of those are temptations that essentially get stuck in the past. I'm not suggesting that we only talk about the past. If we were to talk about, if you had asked me, if the organizers had asked me to talk about Iran today, for example, my focus would have been very different. It would have been partly this, but it would have been also what we need to do, what I think we need to do in order to get to the future that you're suggesting. But we are, I'm sure you know this, many psychologists have talked about this, we are our memories. Our consciousness is our memory. Bergeson talks about how without reckoning with our memories and with our consciousness of our memories, we're not going to make it as individuals. Surely we make the past. Of course we make the past. The past is a construction of our own mind. And that's why we need to be open to the possibility of constantly changing that past. One of the problems that we have, I think, as a nation, is the expectation to have definitive historical answers about the past and about the present. One of the most, I think the single most repeated question that I received after Hoveyda, and the single most repeated question that I have been asked about the Shah book that hasn't come out, although some people have already written reviews about it and rejected it. Someone actually wrote a 30-page review of a book that hasn't come out. It really is, it's truly absurd, but it is. The question that the most people ask, the single most often repeated question is, was he a good guy? Are you going to say he was a good guy? Was Hoveyda a good guy? And I keep saying that, look, I've worked all these years to try to say, I don't know whether he's a good guy or a bad guy. And that even today, if we have a sense of who Hoveyda is, our understanding of him tomorrow will be different. New documents will come out. So we need a sense of our past, I think, before we can go to the future. If we get stuck in the past, you're right, we're going to be stuck in the past. If we don't understand the past, we will keep repeating the past. If we don't understand that we have had a tendency in our culture to expect a messiah and solve our problems for us, we're going to be looking for new messiahs. We're going to be looking for either a Khatami or a general or a king or a party or a Wali Faqih to come and save the nation, unless we understand that messianism was part of our past and did all of it that it has done, and have a reckoning with it. We're not going to begin to believe that, the solution to our problem is ourselves.
We're going to take 2 more questions. Could I ask only those to raise their hands who are absolutely dying to ask a question? We only have 2. All right? All right, you really stand up, and we haven't heard from you. So we'll take these 2 questions. You go first.
This being the American government?
U.S.
government. Yeah. I think the question was that, if I understand correctly, please correct me if I misunderstood it. But my understanding was that in trying to show the reality of the regime in Iran, how far can we depend on the U.S. and institutions like the U.S. government, the CIA? The U.S. government and the CIA pursue one goal. That's America's interest. They have no other interest in mind, as they should. They have U.S. interests, they're U.S. institutions. So any idea that we can deliver Iran into a democracy using American guns, American money, American soldiers, I think is deeply, deeply misguided. If Iran is to have democracy, it has to be made by the Iranian people. Democracy is importable, but it's not exportable. You can learn as a nation what it takes to be democratic, But as the experience in Iraq has shown, you can't force it at the barrel of a gun. If people think that the US government is going to come and get rid of this regime and bring them to power, they are deeply, deeply misguided. And all you have to do is look at Iraq and look at the destruction that has come to Iraq and wonder why some people are willing to see a nation destroyed to get their own limited causes. But on the other hand, this regime is as corrupt and as despotic a regime as I know. I know of no other regime that is as corrupt as this regime today. I really honestly mean that, and I don't mean it to be hyperbolic. And few regimes match this in terms of its brutality, in terms of how it is absolutely doing disservice to the cause of Iran. But we as Iranians have to get rid of this regime ourselves. We can't rely on anyone. No one.
My question is maybe also related to that comment, is that for the past 14 or 1200 years, having been peace with our balanced identity, in other words, Persian and Islamic identity. My own experience shows that most of the Islamic identity and beliefs that I have was 80% of it lost. Because when you go back after the Arab invasion, we were not exactly treated equal and nice and goody goodies and all that things that we used to believe. So how we can, because you mentioned this idea and others speaking, how we can come to this conclusion and this delicate balance? I don't see it. If I be aware of what happened, I believe a knowledgeable Muslim cannot get into Iran because what happened to his own country and country.
No, I think that's a very good question. But let me ask you another question.
Did everybody hear the question?
I think you got up.
Okay.
Let me answer your question by asking another question. Can you imagine an Iranian identity without Hafez? Can you imagine an Iranian identity without Sa'di, without Tazkiratul Awliya, without Tarikh Bayhaqi, even without Shahnameh? None of these books, none of them would make any sense in the absence of Islam. Yes, Islam came to Iran brutally. Iranians fought for 200 years. I only suggest you read Muhammadi's book, 5-volume of brilliantly scholarly research book, where he shows that Iranians fought at every turn. This business about Iranians opening their arms and saying, yes, come, we are dissatisfied with the Sasani, was as much a bullshit as what Chalabi told the Americans about the Iraqi experience. It wasn't there. The Iranians fought, but after 200 years, they had to, they gave in, they succumbed, the Arabs won. But that became intertwined with what we call Iranian Persian culture. Our language is intertwined with Arabic. Now, we kept our language, yes. It is, you know, we can't have a language today that is operational, I think, in spite of what Kasravi tried to do. That is not. But separating the lies of Islam as a religion from the influence of Islam as a cultural phenomenon are two different things. Jews in America do this very well. There are hundreds of thousands of Jews in America who consider themselves culturally Jewish. They know that that tradition, that religious tradition, and everything else is part of their past, but they're not a practicing, believing Jew. But that culture is part of their culture. For us, I think we have no choice but to accept that we cannot be an Iranian without acknowledging that, but rejecting where we have to reject. We have to correct where we have to correct. The lies that we have been told, we have to correct. The heroes that we have been offered, if they are bad heroes, we have to say, no, we don't want this hero. We don't want somebody who knows he's going to lose a battle, and stands and fights and dies. Life should be more important, for example. But unfortunately, cultures don't allow, histories don't allow you to just simply erase the part of the past that you find unpleasant. You have to offer a new reading of your own culture and your past, including that, and then rejecting the parts you don't want. We've never talked about, and partly the West doesn't allow us to talk about this. You can be a cultural Iranian which has Shiism in its language, in its past, in its mythologies, but not be a Shiite. It's possible to do that, I think. And I don't know of any way. You can't take out Safavi history from Iran. You can't take out Ferdowsi, you can't take out Mullah Sadra, and hundreds of other names. And all of these are inseparably entangled with this web that we call religion. I think one of the greatest misunderstandings that occurred at the end of 19th century and caused a lot of grief, and people are just beginning to correct it. Social psychologists, thinkers, Jung was one of the first people to, I think, amongst the psychologists, refer to this. The criticism in late 19th century of religion as an institution was deemed to be synonymous with the criticism of the spiritual dimension that people have and the spiritual dimension that cultures have had. The institution of religion were as corrupt in Europe as they were in Iran. I mean, read Machiavelli and the Pope that had an illicit child from his own daughter. I mean, how bad can you get? You're not supposed to be married at the same time. Then you marry your own daughter and you have a child by that daughter. That's the Pope in Renaissance time. But that is as much, I think, part of Christianity. Augustine is as much part of it. In secularism, we need to have a secular government. But secularism doesn't mean washing away all that has been part of our culture. We don't have that luxury. This is there. I don't know how to do it other than say that we have to critically read it, reject the parts that we don't like, reject the parts that are intolerant, expose the parts that are intolerant. When they force, for example, Jews to convert, describe this as a cultural phenomenon, say that we're sorry. When they deny the Baha'is the right to live as equal citizens in this country, we have to say as a nation, and we don't say it. We don't say it enough. And then say, we're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to allow this. We're going to allow everybody in this country who is Iranian to say, I'm an Iranian, and you can have any faith you want, and you have, regardless of your faith, equal right with me. And what you do in the privacy of your home is your business, and no government, no neighborhood, no friend, no father, no nosy husband has the right to interfere in it. Thank you on that happy note.
So there you have it. The question on the board is Persian something that we have to discover, or is it something that we have to invent? And I think what you heard is that we have to do a little bit of both. Reminds me of the talk that Orkide Behruzan gave earlier yesterday. We'll see you back here at 2:30. The same issue will be discussed from the point of view of theoretical physics. Thank you for the afternoon session. I hope you had a nice lunch. We're here now to hear a talk by a theoretical physicist, Mohammad Hafizi. Bahar will introduce him. I just thought over lunch of making this statement about the context maybe in which we can hear this talk. We've had now one other physicist make a presentation. We had an economist, which is the sort of closest to the exact sciences in the social sciences that we come to. It just occurred to me that in view of what we heard Dr. Milani suggest, who is in cultural studies, that in order for us to be able to get ahead, we need to understand and read about the past, so as not to make mistakes, but so as also to select the best of our civilization, our cultural identities, in order to form new identities and forge new ones. Just occurred to me that in physics, you deal with laws that are universal, universally applicable. The speed of light applies to everybody in the world, regardless of their nationality and cultural identities. The laws of aerodynamics that fly a plane also apply universally to whoever flies a plane. Of course, you can take that plane to flight into towers, or to fly Mr. Khatami out to the US to talk about the dialogue of civilizations, or to fly any one of us for business or pleasure anywhere around the world. That's a different dimension. But the laws that apply, that make a plane fly, apply universally. And would it not be a wonderful exercise, aside from trying to identify our cultural identities in terms of our specific histories and cultures and values, to also identify universal rules and principles that apply, or that we would like to apply across the board to anybody who walks onto as a human being in this world? There are such universal principles that have been identified as, for instance, the Declaration of Human Rights, and many countries are signatory to it. But I just wanted to sort of present that as a backdrop for what we're about to hear in the context of physics, and on the other hand, of history and culture. And perhaps at tomorrow's panel, maybe it could be something that we could propose to perhaps identify the top 3 principles that this community at least will stand by if we were to reinvent human history starting tomorrow. Bahar, if you could please introduce the speaker. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm happy that my breath is back to normal. And pleased to introduce Mr. Hafizi, whom I would, as my PhD advisor did as soon as I took my comprehensive, he called me doctor, so I call you Dr. Hafizi. He's a physics PhD candidate at Harvard University. His current research focuses on applications of quantum optics and quantum information. He also conducts interdisciplinary research between condensed matter and atomic physics, as in the case of topological phase transitions. He received gold and silver medals at the 1998 National in Iran and International in Iceland Physics Olympiad, respectively. He studied in Iran at Sharif University and in France, where he received his Diplôme de l'École Polytechnique. He is the president of the Iranian Studies Group, ISG, at MIT, which promotes an analytical understanding of the long-term social, economic, political, and cultural issues related to the development of the Iranian and Iranian-American society. He's also a co-founder of Harvard Iranian Student Association, and he'll speak to us on the title of Where Do We Stand? Characteristics of the Iranian-American Community. Dr. Hafizi.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming for the afternoon session. I know it's hard to resist going to Orchid's talk, which is better. I know everybody prefers to have a lecture in Persian rather than English, but since we said we have a lecture in English, we're going to have this lecture in English. As a matter of fact, today I'm not talking about physics itself, more about science and scientific relations and cultural and scientific exchanges that we have been thinking about, and some projects and plans that we had in Iranian Studies Group at MIT. Thanks. So the outline of my talk is a short introduction of the Iranian Studies group at MIT. And then I'll talk about some modest research that we had in mind. We used data from US Census 2000 and a community survey that we conducted in the year 2005. No, it's I haven't finished my outline yet. And then I'm going to talk about Iranian academia scientific indicators, like how many engineers, how many scientists we have in the US. And then, so the first part is more talk about some talks and data. The second part is more actions and some plans that we had to promote scientific exchanges between Iran and Iranian community in the US. So the first one is Project Connection, and the second one is the leadership camp for high school age children. So ISG, Iranian Studies Group, is a nonpartisan, nonprofit academic organization with the goal of promoting Iranian civil society through conducting researches on issues related to Iranian society. Iranian society, I mean Iranian in the US, abroad, and Iranian living in Iran. Aims of ISG can be divided in two categories. One of them is to bridge public researches that have been done in different sciences, like in cultural, scientific, and public knowledge. We felt that there is a gap and there is not a good understanding between these two communities. There have been lots of good researches that have been underway in the scientific community, but they haven't been known to public and to community leaders. We try to connect these two with a bridge and hope we have a small bridge and hope can we do a small step to bridge these two communities and help them interact with each other. For that, we want to foster a network of people in universities and community leaders and social activists. For that, we have three different activities in ISG. One of them is research projects that are focused to, for example, find the characteristics of the Iranian community, find the potentials, for their needs, their common values, their concerns. The second one is a journal that we have. It's a quarterly about, again, long-term trends in Iranian society. And the third one is a lecture series that we have about once a month. We have a lecture at MIT in Boston. And since last year, we have a joint lecture series between Iranian Studies Group at MIT and Iranian Studies at Stanford, which is headed by Dr. Milani. So our organization has three different parts. If you like, the board of directors, you can see lots of familiar faces. The far right is Professor Wafa at Harvard University. Second one is Dr. Nayeri, everybody knows here, I'm sure. Third one is Mr. Muqaddam, Dr. Milani, Nushin, Hashemi, and Professor Shahabi and Professor Banu Azizi in Boston College and in Boston University, respectively. They oversee our activities and give us guidelines and help us with the vision and long-term activities that we should have. Our executive board consists of, from right, it's Orkide, Nima Hajir, that's left our group. He's going to Virginia for a position in management in University of Virginia. Farzan, who was here last year, and Sarah, and that's me. And we basically do the research and set out the tactics and different strategies. We have also around 20 research associates who can help us with doing research and our activities. Next, please. Yeah. So, so the aim of my lecture is to first try to see try to observe this community from different angles, find its characteristics, and then see what are the potentials and think of plan some projects for the future. So my talk is more about present and where do we stand in the context and the framework of the whole seminar, which is past, present, future. My talk is more focused on what we can do now, what we are now, and what we can do in the future. So first I'll talk about some characteristics, why they're interesting, because they're interesting if you don't know why we are standing, and if you don't know the characteristics of the community, we cannot have a good understanding, and our policy and decisions and planning will be bad. So next, how we can find them. I'll show you that we have some modest projects going through some data that were available to the public, like Census and National Science Foundation. Thank you very much. Sorry. And National Science Foundation. Thank you. So just to give you a snapshot of some results. For all of the results, you can refer to our website. The address was written in the second slide. It's isg-mit.org. No, thanks, I can do it in that. But I just give you a couple of slides about what we have found. This is the data based on Census 2000 about the Iranian community. So these color columns show the Iranian community in the US, and the blue represent the average in the nation in the US. So for example, from 100 Iranian Americans, 30 of them have at least a bachelor's degree, 15 have a master's degree, about 7% professional degree, and 5% doctorate degree, which you see in each column they stand well above the national average, with 27% of Iranian Americans having a graduate degree or above. Iranian Americans are ranked among the most educated ethnic groups in the United States. I should have a comment about this slide. It doesn't mean the scientific achievement of the Iranian community in the US is like this. It's just one data point about achievements, educational achievements. If we want to be more thorough and exhaustive about the scientific achievements of the community, we should look to, for example, the publication and their impact factor, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is just one point of view. Thank you. The second one is the occupational distribution. If you want to talk about this Iranian community, how many of them are doing community services, how many of them are engaged in management, farming, sales, different categories. This is Iranian Americans, this is nation. We see most of Iranian Americans are engaged in management and professional and related occupations. And this is nation. We see that it's like average, like twice as more. So after this census, we felt that we need to do a survey in the community. Some of the questions in the census have been overlooked, and we felt that we need to address some questions and get information from the community. So, nothing more than. That's why actually I put in the title, you see survey, census, alternatively. So for that, for addressing some, like what are the common values, what are the needs, what are their concerns, we conducted this survey in year 2005. Next slide, please. So the survey was up for about 3 months, and around 4,000, we had around 4,000 valid responses. 64% of the respondents were male, and around 38 female. 60% of them were U.S. citizens, naturalized U.S. citizens, and 12% of them were U.S. born, 12% permanent residents, green card holders, and 8% students, F1 or J1 visa, and the rest different type of visa, like H1 visa. The average age of respondents were between 35 and 49. Thanks. So one of the questions that we asked, this is actually a mixed plot. One of the questions that we asked when you came to the US, immigration period. This is the columns show the data from our survey. The red curve shows the data from INS, or Homeland Security. So we see that in our survey, people responded that they came to the US around the revolution, and the peak is around 79, 80. Although in the data in the INS, you see that there is a shift of around 8 years. This is because INS keeps track of Iranian who go to INS and refer to them, for example, for adjusting their immigration status. So this is not the flow of immigrants to the US. This is the number of Iranian addressing INS. So that's why, like, people came at 79, but they went to INS again for changing their status. That's why the number of Iranians added up and have a peak in 1990 rather than period of the revolution. And the peak was around 25,000. Next slide. This is again based on surveys, religious diversity in the US. You saw a very colorful profile of different religions in the US. Majority 50% Muslim, 9% atheist, 9% agnostics, 3% Baha'i, 3% Zoroastrian, 3% Jewish, 3% Christian, and 21 no organized religious affiliation. Next, please. Then we asked how do they feel about practicing the religion, how comfortable they are with practicing the religion. Almost all of them, they are comfortable in practicing. The blue shows the percentage of being comfortable practicing the religion, and orange shows do not practice, and red shows not comfortable in practicing. Family structure. This is also, we checked both census data and our survey to make sure that our samples is not biased, although our sample is only 4,000 in the community, but just check if we have a very not biased sample. We checked and there was no major discrepancy between our result and census result. If not single, more than 80% are married, which is higher, which is slightly higher compared to the nation. Nation, I think, is around 83. 3% live with their partner, which is less than the national average, which is 7. 8% are divorced, which is less than the national average, 10% for national. If divorced, the custody of children in 70% of cases are by women. National in there, yes. Family structure again, their partners, or we see that most of the in the Iranian community, most of them are married to Iranians, some to Iranian, Americans of Iranian ancestry. Sorry, this is erased here, and this is American, and this is other nationalities. Around 40% are married to Iranians. Language spoken at home. We try to see if there is any discrepancy between different parts of United States, and see if in the family there is a drastic difference between families in the West Coast or East Coast or the middle of the country. Given the statistical problems in the survey and the confidential band, we assume that this is almost the same in different parts of the US. Around 50% of the family, they speak both English and Persian, around 15% English only, and 30% are languagely isolated. I should actually add some stories about that. I was looking in the survey result, and in the raw data, first you should look at the survey to make sure that if there is no wrong entries. And I saw that we asked, the question was like this: which language do you speak at home? So the first one was Persian, second one was English, and then other, please specify, and apply, please check all entries that you can apply. And they responded, some people, they didn't respond English, Persian, and then in other they said English and Persian. And we had a couple of other very strange response. One of them was that, again, the same question, which language do you speak at home? Persian, no. English, no. And in other, I don't speak at home. So, yeah, so it's a tough job to conduct a survey in the Iranian community. Another question we asked was, what are the different aspects of Iranian culture when you're raising your children? What is the most important thing? Most of it is concentrated on language and traditions and festivities. And these are other. This is politics, literature, music, history. There's also religion has a very small contribution, and ethnic language and my ethnicity. How often have your children visited Iran? This is once or twice, 40%, never around 50%. This is also interesting. We wanted to see what is the difference between the Iranian community in the West and in the East. This is the frequency of interaction with Iranians. In the West Coast, it's on daily basis, while in East Coast, it's more weekly or monthly. Most appealing aspects of the culture: cuisine, family values, language, festivities, and religion and mysticism. Assimilation, what makes assimilation difficult? Again, this is based on survey. Language barrier and religious differences are the major difficulties in adjusting to live in the US. Next, please. Sources of news, how you get your news about Iran and Iranian community. Most of them through US media, and then email list. This is radio station. This is, I didn't put the numbers because they are statistically irrelevant. Since it's a survey, I just wanted to show how important they are. It's a qualitative result rather than a quantitative result. Iranian expatriate internet sites like Guya, puyandiranian.com, and Iran-based media, state television. Investment, if you want to invest in Iran, what is the main obstacle that you see? What should be done in Iranian government or Iranian economic society so that people feel more comfortable to invest in Iran? It was actually for me strange to see that removal of the sanction is less important rather than the three other reasons, which is improved asset and human security in Iran, and favorable economic opportunities and favorable political developments. This part is more about Iranian academia's statistical indicators. It is based on National Science Foundation 2006 report. This is the number of Iranian doctorate recipients in science and engineering. This doesn't include medical or social studies. We see again that the peak is on around 1990, because it takes at least 6, 7, 8 years to get the doctorate degree. So that's why the peak is on year 1990. This is the total Iranian, which starts around 200, goes around to 250, and goes down now to 70 doctors per year, which is a slope down. although the total international students in the US stayed around 10,000.